My clients are heroes as they're going through their journeys, and they go through amazing journeys. Throughout my entire career, change has been at the heart of it. And I've really come to understand the journey through change. Joseph Campbell called it the hero's journey. And basically what he said is that every time we go through a transition, every time we go through a transformation, it's actually the same journey that we're repeating, and that people across time and across cultures have been repeating.
Welcome to Grain Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell, and wherever you are on your journey, I hope these stories will help you feel a little less alone. Today, we're going to diverge a little from our usual focus to consider the importance of helping others. My guest today is Brian Gorman, and he came out quite a few years ago at the age of 31. And he now works as a transformation coach. He's going to share his story of helping a younger man through the challenge of coming out under difficult conditions. Before I jump into the interview, I want to remind you that you can find more episodes of Grain Rainbows at grainrainbows.com, and you can subscribe for free in your favorite podcasting app. You can send me email at grainrainbows@gmail.com. You can submit voice feedback at speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis, and you can post to the Grain Rainbows Facebook fan page. We also have a private Facebook group that I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end of the show. If you want to share your story, please email me at grainrainbows@gmail.com. So, Brian, it is great to have you on Grain Rainbows today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Would you mind starting out by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Gladly. I am a 70-year-old gay man. I actually came out and left my wife when I was 31 and got divorced. Professionally, I am a transformation coach.
You're a certified coach with ICF. I can't remember what ICF stands for.
The International Coach Federation. Yes, I am an ICF certified coach. I'm also a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, which is a vetted group of coaches from around North America.
So it sounds like you've been in the coaching profession since it began.
I've been coaching probably longer than that, Ginger, but actually spent a lot of that time classified, if you will, as a change management consultant. That work obviously involved a lot of coaching, both of organizational leaders and of the organizational change practitioners I've worked with over the years.
So do you work mostly with corporate clients or?
These days, I work mostly with small business owners and with individuals who are looking at or going through big personal changes. I recently completed work with a woman in her early 70s. She had been an academic all of her professional life and was retired. Basically, she came to me and said, I may be around another 20 years, and if I don't do something with that time, I'm really going to be pissed at myself. So worked with her to identify what her second career was and map out a plan of how to achieve that.
Well, I'm going to ask you more about that at the end. I actually did IPEC training last year and realized that I did not want to be a coach. But I've been a physician for almost 40 years, but I learned some valuable, important things. And one of the things I want to do on this show is make sure that people who need coaches can have some good resources. So that's why I asked you about that, and we'll come back to it. But the main reason I invited you on the show was because our common friend, Jen Grace, recommended you, that you have a very fascinating story that I would love for you to share with us.
I'd love to. About 12 years ago. Well, let me step back. I am a semi-pro photographer and for many years had a photography website. About 12 years ago, I received an email that said, I'm a high school sophomore in Massachusetts studying photography. Our assignment is to write the biography of our favorite photographer. I Googled gay photographers and you're my favorite. May I interview you? Quite frankly, my ego said yes. And a few days later, I got on the phone with this young gentleman and he came well prepared. One of his questions was, how did you come to your photography? So I told him that it really was through my first male partner who was an artist and a very creative type and actually worked in a photo lab. And after he failed to teach me how to draw and paint, he suggested that I get a camera. But he did teach me how to see artistically. I then turned the question back to Brandon, the young man on the phone. And his response stopped me in my tracks. He said, it's a way to see a world outside the abuse I experience at home every day and the assaults I suffer at school on a regular basis. At the end of the interview, I just could not say, I hope you get a good grade and disconnect. So I offered to stay in touch with him. And we did. That summer, it turned out that his mother, his parents were divorced and he was living with his birth mother. She threw him out and he spent the summer sofa surfing. So we spent a lot of time texting and talking on the phone at night. He was welcomed, I guess, is too strong a word, but he was allowed back into his mother's home that fall. But he was regularly being assaulted at school for being gay.
What year was this?
12 years ago, so 2008. He had teachers asking him if he was ever going to get better. He had students standing out by the flagpole praying for him when he got to school. He had people physically assaulting him in the hallways and stairwells. As a result of that, the school actually banned him from the school grounds. Rather than addressing the issue, they started sending teachers to the public library 2 hours a day to tutor him. At this point, he's a junior in high school. And it was very clear also that his mother was not accepting of the fact that he was gay. So I began to work with him to schedule trips from Massachusetts to New Jersey to stay with me 1 week a month. And at his mother's request, I worked with him on college applications, preparing for the SATs, all those kinds of things that are typically parental activities, scholarship applications, so forth and so on. His senior year, his school district actually paid a different school district to take him in so that, again, they didn't have to deal with the fact that there was an out gay student in the general population of the Mansfield High School. In March of his senior year, March 7th, I got a call from him saying, my mother told me I have 3 hours to get out of the house. What do I do? So I tried to advise him in terms of what he should take with him if he could. He had a boyfriend at the time who drove, and I suggested that he meet the boyfriend away from the apartment because that would, having the boyfriend come to his apartment would just inflame his birth mother even more. I could hear her yelling and screaming and cursing at him with all sorts of anti-gay venom in the background as we were talking. I told him I would rent a car and come up that night, and I found a hotel for him to stay at. I did rent a car, drove up to Massachusetts. The next day, I went into the school with him, met with his guidance counselor with him. She told me I had to find him a place to live in the school district, which I did. 3 months later, he graduated. He moved down here to New Jersey with me. He graduated with a 3.9 grade point average from the new school with a degree in psychology. And he's now a grad student in clinical social work. And along the way, I legally adopted him, and he's now my son.
And that is sort of leaving me speechless. Do you have any natural children?
No.
Because you're of that generation where if you were out and gay, you just didn't have the choice of having children, really, right?
Correct. Yeah. Actually, at one point in my last relationship, it became very clear to me that I did want children, and my partner was very clear that I had to choose between him and adopting a child. I chose to stay with him at that time.
So I really wanted to hear more about your personal story, but I know that Brandon's story is really important to you. So before I ask you to do that, what else about his story do you want us to know?
What's important is, while as a society things have certainly changed in our lifetimes, Ginger, at a personal level, in homes across the country, this was 20 miles outside of Boston, Massachusetts. It's still not always easy. It's still not always accepted to be other than, quote, normal heterosexual.
And one of the things that I think a lot of my listeners are struggling with, older listeners who might still aren't out, is they're afraid to come out and what they're thinking about the things that they will lose if they come out. But it sounds to me like, from your standpoint, if you had not been out, you would not have been there for him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And for me, I think the biggest gift in Brandon is a gift in my life. And I think the biggest gift that he has given me is that he has taught me there is such a thing as unconditional love. His love for me is unconditional, as is my love for him. And I have never experienced that before in my life.
What would you say was the most surprising thing of all this experience with Brandon?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe just the immediate response when he called me that day. There was just no question in my mind that I was going to be the person that I had always said I was, in terms of having the courage to stand up for what's right and to do the right thing.
So you found yourself in a situation where, in a split moment, you basically made a decision that represented your values.
Yes, there was no question that this was what I was going to do. And it was a choice, but it was an immediate choice.
I'm going to break in here for a moment to remind you that I'm always looking for listeners like you who are willing to share their stories. You don't have to do a whole interview if that seems intimidating. You can share via email or voicemail and even remain anonymous. So today I'm going to share an email with you from SS. He writes, I'm at work, started listening and couldn't stop. Wow, amazing what we can come across in social media. I've got a really long story, so I won't share it all, but I want to give you the condensed version. I am 50 and came out to my wife 5 years ago. We are approaching our 32nd anniversary. I love her and she loves me very much, and we have raised 3 sons, and now we have our first grandbaby. My family is my life, and my wife is my best friend. I only came out to her because I was nearing suicide, or at the least becoming an alcoholic. She is not supportive of me in any way, but she loves me and tolerates me. I've been in therapy for over 12 years now, and I still battle depression, but at least I told her the truth. If you would be willing to share your story, you can email me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com. Of course, if you want support from other listeners, the Graying Rainbows private Facebook group is the place to be. I'll talk more about that in the closing remarks. One more thing. You can help Graying Rainbows keep going via Patreon. Patreon allows you to choose a monthly donation that fits your budget. Just go to patreon.com/graying rainbows. That's patreon.com/graying rainbows. Can we back up now and talk about your own personal coming out journey?
Certainly. Growing up, I was never attracted to women, and I was attracted to men or teenage boys when I was a teenage boy. But that was the time when being gay or homosexual or whatever the label was classified as a mental illness. So ultimately, I ended up thinking that if I could just deny that attraction long enough and get married to a woman, that I would overcome it. It didn't happen. I was attracted to men throughout the time I was married. Not that I would act on it, but that I always felt that attraction. My marriage ended for other reasons. But when it did, I said to myself, either I have to find a way to disconnect myself from who I know I am at the core, or it's time to be true to myself. And that was when I came out. And that was 1981.
Bad year.
It was a bad year. I was in Minneapolis at the time, and there was a lesbian and gay newspaper that soon after I actually joined the board of directors of. And one of the first news articles that I read as a gay man was in the summer of 1981 about this new gay cancer that had surfaced in New York and San Francisco. So I actually became very active in the AIDS movement very early on. I used to bring our newspaper into my doctor because we would research articles out in the medical journals and wherever we could find them. And the news about what we now know as HIV and AIDS just wasn't reaching the medical profession very much early on.
Were you involved in ACT UP?
When I got to New York, the first 4 years I was here, I was in a major corporate position where I could not, well, I could have, but I chose not to risk my job by being active with ACT UP. When I was laid off from that position, I actually took a position as the chief financial officer of an AIDS organization here in New York and became active in ACT UP as well.
For listeners who really weren't aware of what was going on during this period, would you say it's fair to say that this is the period when even people who were out to themselves and to the community, you still had to have a very, very low profile for the most part out in the rest of the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Probably wouldn't say you had to, but...
Because Harvey Milk would have argued otherwise, but for the average person.
For the average person, it was much safer, if you will, to keep a low profile. Safer physically, safer in terms of job security, and so forth.
I realized that I was probably gay in 1980, but I was married. And I remember making the decision that I just wasn't, sort of like what you just said, try to stuff it. And because I was married to my best friend, I lived with that plan until he died, which was 2015. But I was very aware in 1980 about what the costs would be. I mean, I live in Alabama, so nobody was out in 1980. I played competitive softball, and I was probably the only, at least self-identified straight person on the team that I was on. And I remember how scared the other women were. I mean, they were things like, they had jobs like school teachers, and they would have lost their jobs.
Absolutely. And the sad fact is that in much of the country, that's still the story today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I eventually hope to do is to reach more people that are at the point in their lives where they have the freedom that they could do it if they really decided to do it. But I know from the emails I get, a lot of people are still scared.
It's interesting. I have so many friends who, in one way or another, have come out again later in life. One who I'm thinking of, whose wife came out and left him, and he remained in the closet until the children were grown and out of the home. I coached a 71 or 72-year-old man a few years ago as he went through the coming out process after 47 years of marriage.
Do you have many clients that's their chief thing that you're working on?
Not very often. It is one of the things. I'm a member of the Gay Coaches Alliance, along with the International Coach Federation and Forbes Coaches Council, but most of my clients are coming to me for other reasons.
But I'm glad that you're out there for the people who need it. That's the reason why I did my coach training last year, was because I was thinking as a part of doing this podcast that I might want to do that. And like I said, I realized that wasn't for me. So I'm really trying to build a, sort of list of resources for people who want that. As you reflect back on, let's see, that's 81, almost 40 years ago. I know that your story with Brandon really, really is sort of the apple of your eye, so to speak. But are there any other highlights of the journey that you'd like to share?
All of it. All of it. It's been an incredible journey for me. Ever since my freshman year in college, change has been the thread that has traveled through my life. My freshman year, which was 1967-68 at Syracuse University, I was doing youth work on the Onondaga Indian Reservation south of Syracuse. At the time, the university mascot was a Native American portrayed by white fraternity brothers dressed up and running around like drunken Indians.
Oh, yeah. I remember when it was a big controversy for Syracuse to change their mascot.
Yeah. Well, I started that effort in 67, 68, and I failed. It took the Onondaga Nation another 10 years to succeed. But this thing called change was clearly activated in my DNA, if you will. I was drafted actually out of graduate school and was a drill sergeant for 4 years in the Air Force. When I got out of the Air Force, I went back to Syracuse University to start a living learning center. I was then director of annual giving at the University of Minnesota to turn around a fundraising program that was flat. So throughout my entire career, change has been at the heart of it. And I've really come to understand the journey through change. Joseph Campbell called it the hero's journey. And basically what he said is that every time we go through a transition, every time we go through a transformation, it's actually the same journey that we're repeating, and that people across time and across cultures have been repeating. It's that journey that I bring to my clients, and I actually have written about it in many different forums over the years. Most recently, a chapter in the Handbook of Personal and Organizational Transformation. The chapter's title is The Hero and the Sherpa. And my clients are heroes as they're going through their journeys. And they go through amazing journeys. I'm working with an 18-year-old now, a female who's a high school senior who wants to become an engineering physicist. And that's quite a journey for anyone to take, but especially for a young lady in today's society. The woman I talked about before who has started a whole new journey into working on climate change after a career in academia. So I get excited, Ginger, about the work that I do, and it's all coming out of this journey that I've taken over the last 70 years.
I get the feeling that if someone was to ask you, you would say that the coming out journey is worth it for most people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a price to pay. like Brandon, I have lost some members of my family as a result, and that hurts. But I've also found myself, and I've found the most incredible family, if you will, of friends, and had the most incredible experience because I'm able to live honestly and fully who I am.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Not that I can think of.
See, I just failed my coaching certification there by asking you a yes/no question instead of an open-ended question.
So you did learn.
Yeah, it was the coaching training I thought was very, very valuable, even if I actually do have one client, but I do palliative medicine, so some of it is very much of an overlap. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, Brian, and I look forward to sharing this interview with my listeners. And if someone wants to reach you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
The best way would be email. And my email is Brian, Brian, at transforminglives.coach.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. I want to thank Brian Gorman for sharing his story. If you want to reach out to Brian, please check out the show notes in your podcasting app or go to grainrainbows.com. I put links to his website and to several articles that he wanted to share with you. I think the key takeaway point from this episode is the importance of giving back to others. And the fact that when we give or help others, we get gifts that can never be measured. I really want to encourage you to reach out to me via email. My email is grainrainbows@gmail.com. If you'd like to share your story with other listeners, we can keep your identity anonymous if that's what you need. If you're holding back, I want to remind you that sharing your story will not only be a powerful experience for you, but it will also help others feel less alone. When I start getting more stories, I will be able to increase Grain Rainbows back to twice a month. So please don't hold back. I also need to remind you that your donations via Patreon help offset the cost of producing the show. The main expense is audio editing, and we haven't yet hit the break-even point. Patreon allows you to choose a monthly donation that fits your budget. Just go to patreon.com/graying rainbows. If you would prefer to make a single donation, you can use Venmo. My username on Venmo is Doc Artemis, DOCARTEMIS. Please indicate that your donation is for Grain Rainbows. Finally, I want to encourage you to become part of the Grain Rainbows community, which currently exists as a private group on Facebook. Last month, I changed the group to private to protect those who aren't totally out. This means that in order to join, you will need to submit a request via the public Facebook fan page. I want to give Midge Noble a shout out because she's been managing the group and she is now responding to messages on the fan page, including requests to join the private group. I know that this is rather confusing, but think of the fan page as the place where you leave public comments and the group as the place where you interact privately with other listeners. I can appreciate that some of you do not use Facebook at all, but for now it seems like the most accessible option. Please don't forget that your feedback is important to me. I try to answer every email personally. You can write to me at grainrainbows@gmail.com. You can submit voice feedback via speakpipe.com/Doc Artemis. And don't forget to visit grainrainbows.com for additional episodes. By the way, I'm still sending out Amazon gift cards to people who send me screenshots of the reviews posted on Apple Podcasts. Also, even if you listen in a different app, please consider subscribing in Apple Podcasts to help other people find the show. I will be back on the first Friday of next month with a new episode. Until then, please check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Books and Ideas. Thanks again for listening. I look forward to talking with you again very soon. Graying Rainbows is copyright 2020 to Virginia Campbell, MD. You may copy it to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grayingrainbows@gmail.com.